Welcome to historic Sleepy Hollow, the home of the legend of the Headless Horseman, the dominant spirit that haunts this enchanted region with pumpkin in hand, that Washington Irving put on the map in his collection of short stories published in 1819, known as the Sketchbook, that includes his classic masterpiece, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. In the words of Irving, certain it is, the place still continues under the sway of some witching power that holds a spell over the minds of the good people, causing them to walk in continual revelry. They are given to all kinds of marvelous beliefs and are subject to trances and visions, and frequently see strange sights and hear music and voices in the air. The whole neighborhood abounds with local tales, haunted spots, and twilight superstitions. Among the pages of time is another legendary figure that has cast a spell on this little valley. A tale that will leave you spellbound is said to be laid to rest in the old Dutch burial grounds. This other legend of Sleepy Hollow was a woman that was once shunned as a witch, yet fought and died for a community that rejected her. It took several centuries since the time of the Revolutionary War for her to receive a marker that reads, Hulda of Bohemia, Herbalist, Healer, Patriot. This raises the question of, who really was this outsider, a crone who lived in the woods all alone? Hulda's story cries out to be told. Here we let her legend unfold. We are Lindsay and Jonas of It's a Charming Life, and we invite you to join us in a journey to uncover the history and mysteries surrounding the legend of Hulda, known as the Witch of Sleepy Hollow. To look upon the grass-grown yard where the sunbeams seemed to sleep so quietly, one would think that there at least the dead might rest in peace. The old Dutch church of Sleepy Hollow has stood since 1685, and it is here that the mystery of Hulda's legend begins to unveil by virtue of an updated narrative of the tale. Local storyteller Carla Hall takes up the torch and offers a spellbinding one-woman storytelling performance, accompanied with a live score by Jim Keyes. Here we meet them both at the Old Dutch Church, and it is with permission that we are thrilled to feature them and present to you an enchanting scene from their live performance entitled Hulda, the Other Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
You may have already seen the headstone beside the church here. It reads, Hulda of Bohemia, died circa 1777, herbalist, healer, patriot, felled by the British while protecting the militia, buried here in gratitude for her sacrifice. Now Carla and I thought long and hard about the best way to tell the story of Hulda. In the end, we settled on Abigail, the name of an enslaved woman we found in the inventory of Frederick Phillips II. We cast Abigail as a young enslaved girl who befriends Hulda. The story is told by a now freed adult Abigail, as she reads her memoir through young Abigail's eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, Carla Lynn Hall.
I realized that I was lost. It was beginning to get cold, and it was starting to get dark, and I did not know where I was. Now, I had been told many things about the woods here in Sleepy Hollow. I'd heard about ghosts, spirits, later on, the Headless Horseman, but mostly I had heard about Hulda the Witch. Now, I don't know exactly what she did, but the people in town were afraid of her. Therefore, so was I. So I thought perhaps I would go back the way I came. I would try to figure that out. And I started to smell wood smoke and the smell of something cooking. So I followed the smell until it led me to a clearing. Because, I thought maybe I was close to home, but this was not home. Now, my grandma had told me if I were to ever get lost, that I should just stay where I was, and that someone would come and find me, but I couldn't imagine how they would. Here I was at this clearing, and then I saw this tiny bark hut, and there were rabbit skins drying nearby. I remembered that I'd been told that the Kitchewan people had lived here, and I thought maybe I could ask for help, but I remembered that they lived in a tribe. They didn't live in a solitary hut like this one. So I tried to decide if I should stay or go, when suddenly the flap to the doorway opened and a woman came out. She was a white woman with long gray hair, and she was wearing a black headscarf. I was petrified and I couldn't move. And she stood listening as if she knew that someone else was there. I wished that I could move, but I couldn't. And then she turned and she saw me. And again, I still could not move. She walked towards me, slowly, curious. And then she crouched down to look me in the eye. And she said, "You are lost, yes?" I couldn't speak. And she said, "You don't talk?" My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her accent wasn't familiar at all. And she wore a long necklace with these beads, and she had thick fingers with silver rings on them. And she just looked at me, and then she laughed, and she said, "Ah, you've heard of me, have you? You have heard of Hulda the Witch, yes? Well, you don't have to be scared. I am not really a witch. I do not eat little children. Do you want something to eat?" And then she went under her apron and she pulled out an apple. And I thought, well, I remember the stories. What do they tell you? You never eat anything that a witch gives you, because that's how they get you, right? She must have known what I was thinking. So she says, "Ah, you think I put something in this apple. Here, I will show you." So she reaches under her apple, she reaches under her apron, and she pulls out a knife, and I jumped. And she said, "I will not hurt you. In fact, I will show you something." So she takes the knife, and she starts working through the apple, through the middle, not from the top. And she begins to tell a story. She says, "Have you heard about the star and the apple?" And I shook my head. And she said, "All right. There was once a little apple tree, about as tall as you. And this little apple tree was very sad. She was sad because she saw the stars in the sky at night and she wanted to touch them. She believed that the pine trees and the oak trees could touch the stars, but because she was so little, she could not reach them. One day, God asked, "Little apple tree, why are you so sad?" And the little tree said, "I'm sad because the stars are so beautiful and I want to touch them, like the pine trees and the oak trees do." God laughed and said, "Little apple tree, the pine trees and the oak trees, they do not really touch the stars. They only look like they do. But you don't need to touch the stars. For I have put the stars in you." And at that moment, Hulda held out half of this apple to me. And there it was in the middle of this apple, an unmistakable star. "How did you do that?" I found my voice. And Hulda said, "My child, this is not a trick. This is just nature. Those are the apple's seeds. And that is just the way they are."
So, from the star of an apple, a valuable lesson echoes through the walls of this chapel. It is said that inside every legend is a kernel of truth, and to find out more, we sat down with Carla and Jim to get some answers to our questions about Hulda, the so-called witch of Sleepy Hollow.
We heard about it through Jonathan Crutch.
Yes.
And his telling of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, he brought up Hulda, and we just thought it was a story.
Well, in the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow, he refers to the witch doctor.
A High German witch doctor.
A High German witch doctor. And later we learned that this so-called High German witch doctor was actually this woman, Hulda. So there were these different stories that came about this woman who had attended this church, Old Dutch church. Well, actually, she wasn't allowed because the minister had forbade the congregation from communicating with her because he thought she was a witch. We went in search of what we could find, and what do you say about a legend?
Oh, well, inside every legend is a kernel of truth.
Yes.
But we also found out about her through historian Edgar Mayhew Bacon, and he wrote about her much later, but he still wrote about her.
Right, her sharpshooting.
Her sharpshooting skills.
Yeah.
And she was a badass.
Yeah, she was. So one of the other things about Hulda, they call her, the witch of Sleepy Hollow, and we're not really sure if she was a witch. Now the thing is, she did have herbal knowledge. She was a wise woman, in that regard. She knew how to heal people using herbs. Now, she also lived in the woods, and she was independent. She dressed the way she wanted to dress. She could hunt for rabbits. She could skin deer. She could speak with Native American people.
And her accent wasn't Dutch or English.
Yes.
Those are the two populations that were here, so she was already a foreigner.
She was an outsider, and she was independent. And when you have a woman, then they say that she's, that they will label you a witch. Now another thing, think about how small Sleepy Hollow was, or like the town. There were only 12, with all the families here, there were like only 12 people living here.
12 families.
12 families, excuse me. But when she came here though, she made number 13. So there was also so when you put all of these little details together, people assumed that she was, a witch. But I think a lot of it was they just didn't know her and they didn't understand her, and they just keep her away. According to the story that we found by, I think that was
Edgar Mayhew Bacon.
Yes, that she had a Bible. And so when she had gone to the war, shall we say, there was a skirmish in Sleepy Hollow, and she left her hut, with her musket, and she was ready to do battle. She knew on some level that she might not return, so she had a Bible, and in the Bible she had this note saying, this is for the widows and the children, of this horrible war, and then she left pieces of gold. So while the people had thought she wasn't a Christian, they assumed, or the minister had assumed that she wasn't a Christian, they were surprised to learn that not only perhaps was she a Christian, she had a Bible, and then she also left her last pieces or her only pieces of gold for the widows and children, who the women who were left behind.
Right, and not only does the Bible say that she, is an indication that she may have been Christian, it is also an indication that she could read.
Yes.
So she wasn't just some crazy person living out in the woods necessarily.
Yes. Good point.
She had education.
I would say the lesson that we can learn, actually there's a number of lessons that we can learn from the story of Hulda. One is that she chose to be kind. There are people who would cross the street if they saw her, the road. They would cross the road if they saw her coming, and yet she still would do kind things for them. Also, it's not necessarily well known, although we learned it from Edgar
Mayhew
Bacon, was that Hulda would go out of her way when she found out that someone was ill. She would leave these herbal packets at their doorstep. But what we later found out was that they would pay her back in kind. They would leave things like these oil lamps, these metal things that she couldn't grow herself. They would do it sort of like in the dark. They would return the favor, yes, surreptitiously. But then when it was like daytime, they would avoid her. The other lesson is to not underestimate people, because you just never know.
Everybody can relate to her as someone who is misunderstood, someone who is an outcast, and they'll feel a kinship with her, and therefore they'll want to leave a little something, want to visit, want to have something they can take from it themselves, whether it's a photograph or a memory, or just to feel that kinship.
Yeah, and I think everyone loves an underdog story. Everyone, when you hear the story of how she was outcast and then she came to the rescue in the end, and to have that story right here, and it's in the middle of, Sleepy Hollow, people just love that. And when you get to hear the story about how she helped people with, by offering them, herbal remedies, it's amazing to see people will leave herbal packets here at her, at her gravestone. And it's also really exciting in the sense that it's one of the more recent gravestones here. And now that people know about it, I think it's probably one of the most visited, because there's definitely a lot of Revolutionary War gravestones here. But I believe that because there's that story, people love to come here and pay their respects.
Before the headstone, all they had was a little flag.
Yes.
People kept stealing the flag.
Yes.
So that was the souvenir they took. So good luck with the headstone. See how far you get.
inspired about the story of Hulda because Jim had been telling the legend of Sleepy Hollow during the day, and
At the Old Dutch Church.
At the Old Dutch Church, and then at night, Jonathan Kruk would tell the story. So Jim and I had just started dating at that time, so I was here all the time. And this particular year, the church erected a gravestone for her. And when I heard the story, I was so fascinated. So anytime anybody would come and look at that gravestone, I was, oh, you gotta hear the story. And I just thought, people need to hear about this story. And I researched everything that I could find, and then Jim also did the same. We are history buffs, or history nerds, if you will, so we find the primary documents, as much of the real things that were going on, and then we come up with our own stories to kind of explain the missing info in the cracks.
To add some humanity.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. The time came after COVID when the story of legend, the original
Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Yes, the original Legend of Sleepy Hollow, it moved to Sunnyside.
Washington Irving's home.
Yes, exactly. And that's where Historic Hudson Valley was producing that version. But then there was nothing going on here at the Old Dutch Church. So the church was looking for something, and I said, hey, we have a story of Hulda that we could do. And Jim's like, we haven't written it.
We don't have a story.
And I said, but we can. And we did. So we wrote the story and we pitched it to the Old Dutch Church. They loved it, and we've been here ever since. Abigail was a name that we found on the inventory list from
Frederick Phillips II.
Yes,
at Phillipsburg Manor across the street.
So she was someone who actually existed. We don't know that she necessarily knew Hulda at the time, but we thought this was a great opportunity for two marginalized people could befriend each other and create this relationship that could be something bigger than the both of them.
And to be clear, what it means to be on an inventory is that Abigail was enslaved to Frederick Phillips II.
Yes, so we are telling the story from Abigail, or Abby as she's known, because she's still a young girl, and she gets to know Hulda because she's a child, and she thinks like a child, and she has a lot of hope and optimism. When I tell the story, I'm telling it as Abigail, the grown-up Abby, telling her memoirs of what happened.
Emancipation came to New York in 1827, so we're casting it roughly that time period.
Yes. I do feel a personal connection to Hulda. I definitely relate to the underdog story. I definitely relate to being underestimated. But there is just something about hearing this story and thinking, wow, this woman, she wanted to do the right thing. She wanted to help people. And in the end, she ended up being this badass. And also, as someone who I've been getting into gardening and learning about herbal remedies, I find myself now walking around everywhere trying to identify, all the plants and flowers and stuff. So I'm so fascinated with nature in that way. And she knew those things. And however she learned them, she used those skills to help other people. So I can't help but put myself in her shoes and imagine what would that have been like to be Hulda. So yeah. So we'll be performing Hulda the last 3 weekends in October. And
here at the Old Dutch
Right
Church?
here at the Old Dutch Church of Sleepy Hollow. And the times are 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock p.m., Saturdays and Sundays. And we should mention that this show it's called Hulda, the Other Legend of Sleepy Hollow, not to be confused with Hulda's Night, which is at the
Rockefeller
Rockefeller Preserve, because sometimes people will think that we're the same, but we're not. But they're both different kinds of shows and
different interpretations.
And of course, we hope you come to ours. If you want to find us online, you can check us out at carlaandkeyes.com, and that's
Keyes.
Yes. And if you want to check out our press release to learn more about the story of Hulda, that's at carlaandkeyes.com/Hulda. Hulda.
And it's Carla with a C.
Ah, yes.
I guess a wrap on that?
Terrific.
Thank you so much I'll just let this roll. Thank you so much for letting us film you guys here. And
Thank you for having us.
And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lindsay and Jonas.
Thank you.
This is great.
What once was just a legend now feels like a memory of an 18th century hero that lived and died outside the superstitious Old Dutch community. So we are curious to explore where Mother Hulda could have lived, and for this we must venture deep into the woods of Sleepy Hollow. As we enter the haunted woods of the Rockefeller State Park Preserve, we trail along old carriage roads and cross the Picantico River over a triple-arched stone bridge. Here we find a mystical mural that whispers that these woods might indeed be under the sway of some sorcery. As we continue along the old Sleepy Hollow Road, we think of these words from Washington Irving's legend. A drowsy, dreamy influence seems to hang over the land and to pervade the very atmosphere. Some say the place was bewitched by a high German doctor during the early days of the settlement. Others that an old Indian chief, the prophet or wizard of his tribe, held his powwows there before the country was discovered by Master Hendrik Hudson. At the intersection of Groy Brook Road and Witch's Spring Trail, we soon reach a representation of Hulda's hut. It feels as if she's not at home, and it's effortless to conjure up a visualization of her out gathering herbs and hunting. Or perhaps she's just out delivering a basket to a family in need, or trading with the Native Americans, which might be where she learned the skill of basket weaving and herbalism. Here we sit down to sketch out what it could have looked like living in solitude in these parts of the woods, and what it took to survive. As the Revolutionary War approached and tore through this neutral no man's land, Hulda's skills played a vital role in the history of these villages. According to Edgar Mayhew Bacon's Chronicles of Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow, published in 1897, he writes, One day, a force of British landed from one of the transports that had sailed up the Hudson. As they marched in imposing array, a volley greeted them from behind walls and tree trunks. Not to be repulsed this time, Hulda fought with her neighbors, using her rifle with great effect, so that she was singled out for vengeance, and before the redcoats retreated to their boats, they had overtaken and killed the witch. Those who had seen her fight carried her to her cabin, and while there discovered between the leaves of her Bible a paper informing them of a little store of gold that she desired to have distributed among the widows whose husbands had fallen for their country.
It's been really exciting to get to know this other legend of Sleepy Hollow. We've been doing a little light hiking here in the Rockefeller State Park Preserve to find this hut. That is kind of the location that Hulda's hut might have been.
So this area of the woods is off of Witch's Spring Trail, and if you continue up this way, it comes to Spook Rock. And if you can tell by these names of this area, but it's a very bewitched sort of part of the woods, and it has a lot of history.
I feel that Sleepy Hollow as a town is like an onion, but once you start to peel it, you peel it off layer by layer, legends by legend, and it also creates a wonderful and amazing town filled with history.
So this spot in the woods where this Hulda-inspired hut is where the event Hulda's Night takes place. Most weekends in October, I believe, and we have not been to the event, but I can just imagine how spooky and eerie it feels here in the evening, surrounded by candlelight, and with the storytelling. And speaking of storytelling, this book by Jonathan Crook has been a wonderful resource in our journey of learning about Hulda and all of the ghost stories of the Hudson Valley. Details many of the ghost stories and the hauntings that take place in this part of New York. And a lot of it is what inspired Washington Irving to put into his legend. So Jonas, the real question we need to talk about is Sleepy Hollow really bewitched?
I would say that the answer of your question is best answered by itself, because what's fascinating is that you can spend a whole day in the forest of Sleepy Hollow and feel an enchanted and whimsical, good, jolly old time. And before you are about to go home, it feels like you just woke up from a nap. If that's the bewitching part or not, I think it's best to let that be unsaid.
I think if there's one part of this question that we can answer, is that if there is a bewitching over Sleepy Hollow, then it seems to draw creatives of all sorts to this area. We all seem to get put under a spell by the enchantments of Sleepy Hollow, and from writers to artists to poets, it just seems to bring out a creativity, a story that we all want to tell in our own way. So we hope you enjoyed following along with us in learning about Hulda, the other legend of Sleepy Hollow. And we can't thank Carla and Jim enough for collaborating with us on this video and bringing Hulda's story to life. As we leave the woods, we can sense a sleepy spell that still lingers over this hollow, of tales filled with fear and sorrow. According to legend, the villagers gave the so-called witch a Christian burial in honor of her sacrifice, but under the condition that her grave remain unmarked. Hulda's headstone is centuries in the making, and has now stood since 2019 and emulates the 18th century gravestone style of John Zuricher, masterfully carved by Robert Carpenter. There is still a mystery that shrouds the legend of Mother Hulda. Was she a real person of Bohemian background, and why would she come to Sleepy Hollow? Was she really a witch doctor, or did she simply practice healing arts? Perhaps, like her Hessian soldier counterpart of this legendary valley, it's best to leave the lines blurred and buried between history and myth, much like the fog that rolls in from the Hudson River across the old Dutch burial grounds. So perhaps the next time you pass through Sleepy Hollow, you'll follow in the footsteps of those who leave an offering in honor of the countless souls that are often misunderstood, yet have inscribed their mark on the epitaph of time.